Help support The Loft. Go to patreon.com/C64Woody, click the link down below, and like, share, and subscribe.
When it comes to video games, nobody compares to Atari.
I find Intellivision more sophisticated and lifelike.
Gentlemen, move over for my friend Commodore home computer system. Commodore does more than your machine.
Hey everyone, and welcome to The Loft. I'm Woody. So it has been a little while since I've been here, and I apologize for that, but I've been taking care of life and just trying to find a good work-life hobby balance. So I think we're finally getting there, but more about that later. Now, many of you know I took a trip back in January up to Dallas to finally visit Computer Reset. While I was there, the gentleman offered his Commodore 64C that had belonged to his brother who had passed away. He was looking through his brother's closet and found it, didn't have any use for it, and offered it up to the Facebook group and arranged that it would come to me. And I didn't know what shape it was in. It was sight unseen. I knew a couple of keys were missing and a couple of springs were missing, a couple of key caps, I should say. And I knew it was in rough shape cosmetically. I didn't know if it worked or not. Well, I got it home and plugged it in. It does work. And I even went to Bo Zimmerman's house and ran the diagnostic cart test with the full harness and everything, and it looks fantastic. It works perfectly. Now, here it is. As you can see, it needs some cosmetic work. A little bit closer there. You can see the badge is all in rough shape. It's dusty, got some sticky up here. But no, it needs a lot of work in terms of getting it cleaned up and looking nice once again. I did think I was going to have to retrobrite. I still might, at least the keys, so we will see how that goes. It has been uncharacteristically rainy and cloudy here in the Central Texas area lately, so I don't know if I'll be able to actually retrobrite this. But we will see. So that is going to be the project for this month of May, or what I am dubbing ComMAYdore. The merry, merry month of ComMAYdore. So come along and enjoy the ride. But first, you may notice behind me, there is a new addition to the Star Trek shelf. I want to brag about Mrs. Woody for a minute. It's a Funko Pop diorama or scene, and if you recognize the scene, it's from Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. One of the most heartbreaking scenes in cinema history. Obviously, Admiral Kirk, Captain Spock, at the very end of the movie. And Mrs. Woody actually was shopping, wasn't even looking for anything like this, and just happened to see it randomly on a shelf. It wasn't even with anything. And it was less than $40. She looked at that and said, well, that's coming home. And surprised me with this beautiful Funko figurine set. And I, of course, immediately put it on the shelf right here. And I like being able to brag about my wife here on this channel. Many of you know she puts up with all of my shenanigans. So if I can brag about her any point, I'm going to take the opportunity to do so. So, Mrs. Woody, thank you once again for this thing. So let's put it in its rightful spot right now. There we go. Ta-da! Once again, Mrs. Woody, thank you for such a beautiful, thoughtful gift. Let's tear this puppy down. So here we are in the dining room area of my home, also known as the Loft Lab. And here we have the Commodore 64C that I got back in January. As a general rule, if you're in the market for vintage computers, or really any technology, if you're looking on eBay, Facebook Marketplace, or Craigslist, things like that, and you see untested or tested to power on, but no further testing done, go ahead and assume that there's something wrong with it. That way, when you do get it, if you get it, your expectations are low. Sometimes you'll get a hidden gem that they weren't able to test properly, and it fires right up, no problem. Maybe one of the chips needed to be reset, and just in shipment, that jostled it enough to fix the problem. Who knows? But as a general rule, sight unseen, untested, depending on what level of skill you're comfortable with, how much effort you want to put into restoring and repairing and troubleshooting, or if you just want a parts machine. There are some that will specifically say untested or for parts or repair, so you know that that's a project piece. So I'm going to crack this nut open carefully and show you the inside. I will say that when I actually clean this thing, I will be using gloves because I'm kind of wishing I had gloves now. So it shows that it hasn't been out of the closet in a while. I do have springs and keycaps coming for these two keys. I don't know when they'll be here because they're coming from Europe, and given this situation in the world right now, the mail moves a little slowly. So I know they're coming. I have confirmed that he sent them, so it's just a waiting game. But we will take apart the keyboard, take all the keycaps off, give them a thorough wash. But first, that'll be in the next video. But first, let's go ahead and open this thing up, and I will tell you some things about the Commodore 64C. Now, right off the bat, I have my iFixit tool kit right here. Phenomenal product, by the way. I'll leave a link down in the description. You can get it on Amazon. Fantastic. One thing I will go ahead and say is we will be replacing the feet. I already have those ready to go. So let's go ahead and get the screws out. So the first three, here, here, and here, are all hex screws. Let's go ahead and take them out. Given how many times I've shot this, I've gotten really good at tearing this thing down. I do want to be careful with the plastic as I open this, just because it's almost 40-year-old plastic. This particular machine is from 1987-88, so it's not as old as Clint, but it is still a spring chicken. So the plastic is a little brittle. Now, I did say that I was going to talk about Commodore 64C, what exactly it is. I always get nervous when I hear that snap. The Commodore 64 was initially released in a tube, and it sold decently, but really didn't pick up steam until 1983. People still had VIC-20s, and Commodore was still selling VIC-20s at the time. So, next screws are Phillips heads, these two right here on the keyboard holding it in place. So the original design of the Commodore 64, especially the case design, was similar to that of the Commodore VIC-20. The ports were a little different, but beyond that, it was a very similar case style. In fact, you could put in a VIC-20 or even PET keyboard into a Commodore 64 and it would work fine. But the case style is affectionately called bread bin. Here's the keyboard. I don't know if you can tell the dust, but it is kind of grimy. We do have a little bit of rust here, but that's to be expected. And it's not as dusty because I've touched it, but still a lot of dust in there. And we need to go back to the hex. First, I'll go ahead and finish explaining the 64C. The original bread bin style. It also had a longer motherboard. Clint, actually, my wood grain Commodore 64 is a bread bin motherboard from either 83 or 84, I can't remember. In 1985, Commodore was looking to revamp their product line. They wanted to release a new 8-bit machine, the Commodore 128, which had backwards compatibility with the 64 to take advantage of the massive software library and game library that had come about for this machine. This thing was a cash cow. What is this piece of metal? Well, if you look at these spots here, those are connecting physically to the chips underneath and acting as a heatsink. What else is it for? Why is it so massive? Well, it's to block RF signals. It's an RF shield. Back in the day, TVs and radios, they used RF signals, radio frequencies, and these also had RF output, emitted radio signals. So to prevent interference that would cause problems in the functionality of your radios and your TVs, the FCC mandated that any US machine or any machine sold in the US had to have some type of RF shielding. Today, that's not so much a concern. You don't really need these anymore, and a lot of the devices that these would have interfered with are long since obsolete. The problem with this on the 64C is it has keyboard mount brackets, and you need those. So I do have a replacement set of keyboard brackets coming that will allow me to put the keyboard in here without having to keep this. Now here we are, the motherboard. This is what's known as a shortboard Commodore 64C. What's the difference between a shortboard and a longboard? It looks like it takes up the whole thing. Well, it's not shortboard this way, it's shortboard this way. You notice the amount of space between here and the front. You could put a longboard in here, but it would come up to about here. And with the C64C, the Commodore C64C, they were able to revamp the 8-bit product line with the backwards compatible 128 that also had a 64 mode that could take advantage of the software library for Commodore 64. And they wanted to match the look of the C64 to the 128. So they revamped the case style and revised the motherboard, and they were able to consolidate a lot of the chips. It's still 64K of RAM, but a lot of the RAM has been consolidated into smaller and fewer chips. And that's not all that they revised on this. It's a new version of the SID chip, 8580. It's the sound and interface device chip. And this revision implemented a lot of the things that the designer of the SID originally wanted to put in there. And this is the VIC-2 chip. I almost said VIC-20. And it's your video chip. And this puppy right here, this is the MOS or MOS 8500. It is the CPU. It's an HMOS revision of the MOS 6510, which was the original CPU in Commodore 64. And it's also in the same family lineage of the 6502, which you find in devices like the Apple II, the BBC Micro, Atari 2600, and NES. It was a very well-loved chip. I will do a more thorough job of getting this off, but this is thermal paste for the heat sinks. That will be coming off because the new heat sinks have thermal tape, so we'll make sure to put those on when they get here. Coming up, now that we've torn this down, I'm going to make sure I take a picture of the keyboard as it is, and then I'm going to take off each of the keycaps and the springs, wash those, thoroughly wash the keyboard, give the main board a good cleaning, a good isopropyl bath, and dust it. Now, unfortunately, we do have to keep this bottom shield because it helps hold the motherboard in place. So that's unfortunate, but we will try our best to restore that. Of course, the top of the case and the bottom of the case, both pieces, will be thoroughly cleaned. And I will see if we need to retrobrite it after I've cleaned it. I want to see what it looks like clean before I make a final decision on whether or not to retrobrite it. The retrobriting will have to be another separate video at a later date. We will clean this up. We will get a replacement badge because that one's funky. It has seen better days. We will get this cleaned up, and that will be what we do for ComMAYdore. We will clean the contacts on each of the ports as best as we can. There are some things that I may want to do in the future with this thing, whether it be updating the video out. I may do an in-case mod, get the soldering iron out and all that, or I may just get an attachment and an adapter, but that is a possibility. One of these days I would like to get one of those mechanical keyboards for Commodore 64. If this needs retrobriting, and I try to retrobrite it and it comes out horribly, I may paint the case. And at that point, there is a poll on my Patreon about that, but at that point I'll open it up to people who are also viewers but may not be on my Patreon. If you want to join my Patreon, down below. So that is what is coming up for this month. Thank you all so much. I am going to stay down here for a little while and put this thing back together because we need the space. But I want to thank you all for stopping in, and I'll see you next time.